Hi, I'm Paul Marcel. Well, in this episode, we're going to get the drawer fronts applied. Now, in doing this drawer assembly, I showed you before when I was using these 16th-inch thick cardboard shims. After I did the cuts on the table saw, I reassembled it and I put 2 shims in between each to make up for the kerf that was cut off the table saw. Now, since then, I did some fiddling around, and what I did is I took out one of the shims here, one here, and then up the top, and I took those extra ones and I put them at the bottom. So in that sense here, this piece is very close to where it was before. So this, there's hardly any shaping difference I'm going to have to do for that. And I was going to have to do some anyway as I go around the corner. And the same goes for this side over here. So I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and just use one shim. So I have only a 16th inch in between the drawers because I think it looks a little bit more elegant with them being a little bit crunched in more. There's not as much space here. You don't want something breaking up the pattern as much. Now to do the glue up, of course, one way, if you're doing regular applied drawer fronts, a lot of times you'll just have your shims here that you have at the bottom. You're going to take the bottom one, you're just going to slap it up onto the drawer, put some clamps on there to clamp it up, and then you'd go march your way up. That would be the initial thought of how to do it. The problem is that once you have this one with clamps on it over top, you're not going to be able to do that next drawer. So what you would have to do is wait until this glue sets enough to take the clamps off, do the placement of this next drawer, and then go back and put clamps back on there to finish it off if you want to leave it overnight with clamps. So it's a lot of hassle with shuffling clamps. So usually the way I like to do this is I go from top down. What I would do is I would lay all this out with the shims, make sure everything is nice and placed, and then I would glue this top drawer front up. I would apply it by tipping it up from the bottom and placing it all correctly, using this as my bottom surface, and then in my case the alignment lines that I made on the back of this, I would place that whole thing and then put the clamps on. But since this one's position has nothing to do with this top one anymore, I could actually remove that drawer, put it off on the side, and let it set and glue up overnight. And then I could take the shim off and then do this next one. I could work my way down the drawer fronts to get them all glued on. Now for my glue up, there's actually something that presents itself to makes it a little bit more difficult, is that I've got 3 pieces for top 3 drawers, and the bottom drawer is 2 pieces. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated to do this glue up in that sense that I don't want to put this wet, and this wet all on this drawer front and be sliding them around, trying to get them aligned and get them aligned with each other and everything else. So what I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to go from the top down, but I'm only going to do this side. This side here is the one that has the registration lines on the back. So I'll be able to easily get them right in the right places. I'll have all the clamps on them, we'll set them off to the side. It turns out I'm recording this at 2 a.m. So basically when I'm done with that, I'll just wait till tomorrow morning, and then I'll come back out here and I can do the other side of the glue up. The advantage to that will be that for me, I can put them on here and I could squeeze them against this other side, because the other side will already be glued in place and solid. So it'll help making these joints clean. I don't have to worry about the placement. It's basically push it till it stops. Now the glue I'm going to use for doing these drawer fronts is just a liquid hide glue. Of course this is going into a bathroom, so you have to think, well, but liquid hide glue can soften up when it's exposed to humidity. This doesn't really fall apart that easily in a humid environment. It's not like a little bit of humidity, one hot shower and poof, all the drawer fronts are going to fall off. So I've actually used hide glue in a couple other projects that were installed in bathrooms, and they've never ever had a problem. So I'd like to use hide glue for a couple different reasons. One is that it has a little bit of a longer open time, and it's a little bit slicker, so it's a little bit easy to move it around. It's not going to tack up and firm up instantly and then have you arguing with it, so you have a little bit more setup time, even though it's going to be just as strong in the end. Another reason is actually for its reversibility. This front is very sculpted, so if I ever needed to replace one of these drawers, I mean, if this was sent to a customer, obviously I'm my own customer in this case here, but if it was sent to a customer and somehow something happened to one of the drawers, who knows what, but something happened, I would be in a bad state if I had this attached with a glue that was going to make it really difficult for me to reverse it out. Now, with this, of course, I would take a bandsaw and I would just slice the drawer off the back, leaving just a little bit of the back, but then since this releases under heat and moisture, it'd be very easy to just lightly steam the back and then just take a scraper and scrape off the rest of the drawer. And then I would have my fronts that could be applied to a new replacement drawer. Now I've gone back to all these drawers and I've applied wax to the runners and wax to the sides of the drawers and all that, and they're really running really nicely now. And the other benefit of that is that I've gone ahead and I've applied wax to the, the top edge here and the bottom edge. So since there's wax basically all the way around this drawer front, when I do this application, any squeeze out that's going to come out on here, I'm not really going to worry about it too much. It's starting to look a little bit better now. I got all the drawer fronts applied. They're actually moving very, very well. Oh, yeah, it's starting to look like a bathroom vanity. So the drawers are moving very, very well with these handles, and I'm finding them to be very comfortable. I mean, even with my left hand, they're working, and my left hand, I almost need my right hand to help me out. It just doesn't do much on its own. Somebody had a concern that they wrote me saying that, well, these handles are kind of off-center, so there's probably going to be some binding problems, but I'm not finding any binding problems. I mean, if there's going to be any binding problem, I would find it by pulling with the one finger. That's not to say that that's not a very valid concern. Normally you do want to put those handles dead in the middle. Partly I think what makes this still work, even though they're slightly off-center, is the way that the drawer guides were made. They're very much positioning the drawers so that they have no choice but to move exactly along the rail where we want them to, and they only have a little bit of play as you get a little bit further out because of the way that I planed away some of the inside edges to make it easier to move with it then cinching it up so it doesn't move at the very end. So I think that that has some part in it. Now, in all honesty, this bottom drawer, even before I applied this drawer front, it had a little bit of a binding issue on this side, and it still does if I push off center on one side. There we go. If I push on this side instead, it definitely binds. I think what happened is I might have either planed a little bit too much wood off this side here on the bottom side, or the runner is too loose. One of the two. Something I'll take a look at later. That's the reason why I nail those runner guides in place, is because it's actually going to be very easy for me to just pull that up, pull the 3 nails or whatever I put in there, and then shoot it again. What I need to do on the individual drawers is finesse these edges here. I mean, you can probably very clearly see them on even the camera from a distance. This is because these parts were individually shaped. So getting these to exactly match the same height across drawers and across the pieces is actually fairly difficult. You get kind of close, but you don't need to be too accurate, because you're going to go in afterwards with like this round Iwasaki file, and I'll be just filing these to get them level to each other. And then afterwards, when I get the drill base sanding kit and I sort of finesse over the whole thing with 320 or 400 grit, that'll be able to smooth all that out and it'll look pretty good. Now, another concern is that normally when you take like a big panel like that and you rip it into drawer fronts, normally you would hit it with a block plane or smooth or whatever to get rid of some of the machine marks on the top and on the bottom edge before application. You can do it before application because it's a lot easier at that time than after. Now, in my case, I didn't bother doing that because I already know that there's going to be some discrepancies here, for sure. So I need to plane after the fact anyway. So I left it that way there I wouldn't be removing too much material. You'd hate to take this down to get rid of all the machine marks and then find that, well, now I got to go even further because there's different widths and things like that. It's just much easier to do after the fact. So that'll be something that I'll be doing as well. The main part of the sculpting that's going to be remaining, and something that we're going to be using the rasp for, is to do the shaping of this corner. So this corner here, to round it around to the side, I want to smooth this down so that it'll match the height of this portion here, and also I want to sort of round this and pillow it to match with the rounding that's here. Now, there are a few minor discrepancies in where the curve happens, right? I mean, that just happened because, again, it was 3 separate panels. I drew lines and such, but there's some small variances there. So when I do that, I'll be able to actually correct for some of that as well. And then these parts here get sanded up to 400 grit as well with the drill-based sanding kit. So I finished doing the sculpting of the sides here, and I'm really liking the feel of it. It's got a great tactile feel, which was something I was looking for in this project, besides being, you know, visually interesting when you're bent over brushing your teeth. So I'm liking it. These are all ready to go, ready to get wet sanded for the finish. I did actually take the sander to the bottom sections here on both sides so that they have some undulations as well. On the sides, actually, I made it more pronounced underneath where the embossing was higher, just so that it really accents that nicely. So I'm liking the look of it all. So what I need to do now, though, before I do the finish, is I'd really like to, and I could do this later, but I might as well do it now, is I want to size these side panels. Now, these were made to be oversized, and actually just through the process of doing all this sculpting, you know, this was never actually level to the top just by its placement. The other one is actually fairly close, but this one is not. So in a way, I need to cut an arbitrary line here to make it match up with the top segment. So what I did is earlier I took the top segment and the bottom segment upstairs and I did a dry run. I still used that little cleat that you saw from episode 7, and I wanted to see where this was going to go when I go to do the insertion. Now I had a feeling it was going to bump into the plumbing, and even though we've changed the plumbing a little bit, it is running into it. So it turns out that the plumbing is right here on this rail, exactly right on there. One of the reasons I built this in 2 parts was, you know, partly convenience in the shop, but also because I wanted to make it that when I insert this segment up into the top segment, I could adjust its position a little bit, either insert it a little bit further or maybe not quite as far, so that I could dodge some of the valves if I just needed that extra 1/8 inch. Well, it turns out it's smack dab on there, so there's no reason for me to take advantage of that. I'll just insert this up until it becomes flush with the top surface of the rails here on the top segment. So they'll be inserted that whole distance. Now, because the valves are going to be there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply cut this rail at those 2 positions. It's not going to make any effect on the strength because we have all these other rails. Now, for sizing the panel, that was one of the considerations, was this dry run, is where do I cut this panel? Now, because I'm going to be inserting it the full distance and I'm not going to be taking advantage of, you know, being able to adjust it, what I did is I took a wheel marking gauge and I measured the thickness of that rail on the top segment. And then I took this panel off and applied some blue tape. Once I had the blue tape in place, I simply took the wheel marking gauge and I scribed across, and then I peeled off the tape that I'd cut off. So effectively, when I go to do the installation, I'll be inserting this all the way up until this is the only part that's exposed, is where the blue tape is. Now, the reason that's important for me is, again, these panels, the way that they ended up getting sculpted and worked and all that, they're not straight. They're not exactly straight and flush with the top. So I need to have some way of marking where the cut is going to be. Now that I have this tape here, I can simply place this in the right place with its registration lines that I had made with some tape, you know, and then to make it more obvious for you on the camera, I would scoot this over and mark where this tape line is on this side and on the other side. And then with that, I can draw a line, take it to the bandsaw that line off, do a little cleanup with a block plane to remove the machine marks, and now this panel is ready to go. When I install the panel, it'll be flush to the bottom of the top segment, or there'll be just a very, very minor gap, which will actually be okay because there are going to be some expansion and contraction considerations with this panel. Now, there is one other consideration for sizing the panel, and that's this back edge. This is the edge that's going to be up against the wall, and I made this intentionally larger because I want to be able to scribe it. Now, for finishing this panel, all I care about is doing that top cut on both of these panels, and I'm just going to go ahead and start doing the finish. When we go to do the installation, I'll scribe the line back here in order to get it to go flush to the wall. We'll either sand it or use the bandsaw, depending on how curvy it might be. And then, just before I do the install, that's up against the wall anyway. I'll just simply take some Armor Seal, give it a couple swipes so it's got a good soaking in that side grain, and then I can go ahead and do the installation. It'll be just fine.